I'm Martha Mendoza. I work for Frontline PBS. We make documentaries, and I formerly spent 30 years with the Associated Press, and I continue to collaborate closely with the AP.
I want to talk about when our investigative stories are hiding in plain sight.
It was all the way back in 2014 that my colleagues Margie Mason and Robin McDowell began trying to figure out how to not only find people, men, who were enslaved, but track their seafood all the way back to Western tables. Because until then, we know that there's human trafficking going on in Southeast Asia, but there's not a response coming from the customers. We tracked seafood processing to a very small island in Indonesia, and it was very hard for us to be in touch with each other because there were no comms. But Margie Mason contacted me and said, you know, they're keeping them in cages. The men are in cages. And that's when, for me, this whole thing just escalated. The most difficult and dangerous parts probably came in Benjina when the seafood processing company, the fishing company, began to be suspicious of my colleagues and told them it was time to leave the island. We didn't have enough evidence yet, particularly ship numbers, types of seafood, who these men were. So they rented a boat and took it out in the water to try to get more information from the men who were trapped on their boats. And at that point, the fishing company sent out somebody in a speedboat that seemed to try to ram them. It was like, and they were pulling the engine chain to get it started. That was pretty scary.
Show of hands, how many of you play on marine traffic?
It took initially using AIS, satellite tracking technology, to follow the boat at sea over a 2-week trip into Thailand. Then we as a team staked out the trucks that were unloading the seafood. By staking out, I mean get in the back of pickup trucks with dark shells on the back, and then follow those trucks through this port town in Thailand, south of Bangkok, to the factories where it was being driven into. At that point, we would lose sight of the seafood, but we had watched people who were enslaved loading that seafood onto a ship. We had followed the ship. We had watched the seafood being unloaded into trucks and then into these facilities. Breakthrough moment came when I called an importer casually and said, where do you send your fish to? And he started naming some of America's largest supermarkets. The past 10 years have been transformative, both journalistically and policy-wise. Now, whether that policy is transferred into action yet, not so much, somewhat though. So the stories that came out, both from me and then, thank goodness, from a much broader audience, first began looking at why are products of forced labor not being stopped at the border. I am almost reflexive in saying, what's the supply chain on every single story I see? And so one story has led to another, to another. If a factory, a denim factory burns down in India and people are trapped inside, obviously we're covering the disaster, but I'm the nerd going, who are they making denim for? Because that only then is somebody going to actually compensate and perhaps rebuild more safely. Without that supply chain tracking to the West, there's just much less accountability.